Alright, let's take a closer look at the Mercury dime, because the smallest details can reveal why collectors pay such close attention to certain examples. First coin. The 1937 United States Mercury head dime can look almost ordinary at first glance. A small silver coin with a familiar winged portrait and a bundle of rods on the reverse. But this particular issue sits at an interesting point in the Mercury dime series, and the difference between an everyday circulated example and a truly exceptional specimen can be surprisingly large. Before judging one by its date alone, collectors need to examine the mint mark, strike, surfaces, preservation, variety, and especially the quality of the reverse bands. Later, we'll look at documented auction results for authenticated examples and see how dramatically the market can separate an ordinary 1937 dime from a superb or unusual specimen. That distinction matters because 1937 was not a famous key date in the traditional sense, and millions were produced, yet certain survivors have become highly desirable because decades of circulation, handling, cleaning, and storage removed most of the coins from consideration at the finest grades. In other words, the story of this dime is not simply about how many were made. It is about how many survived in the right condition, with the right characteristics, and with enough originality to satisfy demanding collectors. The story begins with the Mercury dime itself, officially the winged Liberty head dime, introduced in 1916 and designed by sculptor Adolf A. Weinmann. The popular name, Mercury dime, came from Liberty's winged cap, which many people associated with the Roman god Mercury, but the figure was actually intended to represent liberty. By 1937, Weinmann's design had already been circulating for more than 2 decades, giving Americans a familiar piece of silver currency during a period when the country was still emerging from the Great Depression. The United States economy had improved substantially from the worst years of the early 1930s, but the decade remained marked by economic uncertainty, changing employment conditions, and a gradual return of industrial activity. Every dime produced in that environment was practical money, not originally a collectible. The 1937 issue was struck at 3 facilities: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. A Philadelphia coin carries no mint mark, while a small D identifies Denver and an S identifies San Francisco. The production totals were substantial, but very different. Philadelphia struck 56,860,000 pieces, Denver produced 14,146,000, and San Francisco made 9,740,000. Those numbers immediately explain why the mint mark deserves attention, because the 3 versions did not enter the collecting market with identical populations or identical levels of scarcity. Underneath the historical design, the 1937 Mercury dime has the classic specifications that define the series. It is composed of 90% silver and 10% copper, weighs 2.5 grams, measures approximately 17.9 millimeters across, and has a reeded edge. The copper was not simply decorative. It was incorporated into the alloy to provide greater durability than pure silver while preserving the coin's intrinsic silver content and familiar monetary characteristics. On the obverse, Liberty faces left wearing the winged cap, with Liberty surrounding the portrait and the inscriptions in God We Trust and the date completing the design. The reverse is equally important for collectors because it displays a fasces, the ancient bundle of rods representing authority, wrapped with horizontal bands and accompanied by an olive branch. The letters United States of America and 1 dime identify the nation and denomination. Weinmann's design was created during an era when American coinage was becoming increasingly artistic, and the Mercury dime remains one of the most admired U.S. silver designs because its compact size carries an unusually strong sense of movement and symbolism. Yet that beauty also creates one of the coin's most important collecting challenges. The reverse bands can be difficult to strike completely. The central horizontal bands on the fasces are closely examined by specialists, and a coin that preserves sharp, uninterrupted band separation can receive the coveted full bands designation. That designation can transform the desirability of a coin even when the date itself is relatively common. This is where the 1937 Mercury dime begins to separate into very different collecting categories. A circulated Philadelphia example with noticeable wear, scratches, or surface damage is generally a silver-type coin rather than a major rarity because the original mintage was enormous and many pieces survived. A collector examining one in higher condition, however, starts asking very different questions. Are the Liberty's hair details still sharp? Are the wing feathers complete? Does the reverse show strong definition in the fasces? Are there distracting marks in the open fields? Is the original luster still present, or has the coin been cleaned? These details determine whether the coin belongs in an ordinary album slot or becomes a serious condition rarity. For example, a certified 1937 Philadelphia dime in a strong mint state grade can enter the higher hundreds or around the low thousands, depending on the precise grade and market conditions. PCGS records an auction result of $1,800 for a certified 1937 example graded MS-64, demonstrating that a normal date coin can command substantially more than its face value when condition and certification align. But the real separation becomes visible with full bands pieces. A certified 1937 Philadelphia Mercury dime carrying an MS-68 plus FB grade reached $5,520 at Heritage Auctions in 2024. That is not a normal price for every 1937 dime. It represents an exceptionally preserved and sharply struck example at a level where condition rarity becomes the central story. The Denver and San Francisco versions add another layer to the investigation. The 1937D had a mintage of $14,146,000, considerably smaller than Philadelphia's production, and ordinary examples can still be found because many Mercury dimes were saved or survived in collections. Nevertheless, high-grade pieces become increasingly difficult as the grade rises. PCGS records an auction result of $1,725 for a 1937D graded MS-68, while the full bands designation can create an entirely different level of demand. One extraordinary 1937D full bands example is recorded at $16,100 in a heritage auction sale, showing why collectors must never confuse a headline auction result with the typical value of the date. The San Francisco issue is particularly fascinating because only $9,740,000 was struck, the lowest production total among the three 1937 versions. A regular 1937S has recorded auction results such as $2,280 for an MS-67 plus example, while a superb MS-68 example reached $21,850 at heritage auctions. Again, that extraordinary figure belongs to a highly certified, exceptional coin and should never be interpreted as the normal value of a 1937S Mercury dime. The lesson is crucial. Mintage establishes the starting point, but grade, strike quality, preservation, certification, and collector competition determine where a particular coin actually lands. There is also a fascinating variety angle that advanced collectors should understand before assuming every 1937 Mercury dime is identical. The 1937S is catalogued with a double die obverse variety identified as FS101, and certified examples have been documented by major grading and attribution services. The existence of this variety demonstrates why specialists do not stop after reading the date and mint mark. A variety can change the identity of the coin itself, while a full bands designation describes an important aspect of strike quality and preservation. On the reverse, the bands around the fasces are examined under magnification because weakly separated bands can prevent a coin from receiving the premium designation even when the rest of the surfaces are beautiful. A strong strike does not automatically mean the coin is rare, and a rare variety does not automatically mean every example is valuable. Collectors also encounter coins with die deterioration, machine doubling, scratches, polishing, environmental damage, and other characteristics that can be mistaken for varieties or mint errors. Genuine mint errors are a separate category and must be evaluated individually. That is why experienced collectors compare suspected varieties with recognized references and certified examples rather than relying on a photograph or a dramatic description from an online listing. The 1937 SFS 101 variety, for instance, has documented certified auction activity, including an example graded MS67FB that sold for $1,500, illustrating how an attributed variety can attract specialized interest without automatically reaching the extraordinary prices achieved by the finest condition rarities. Condition is ultimately where many 1937 Mercury dimes either gain or lose their collector appeal. Professional grading generally uses the Sheldon 1 to 70 numerical scale, with circulated grades describing increasing levels of wear and mint state grades, beginning at MS60, reserved for coins that show no evidence of circulation. Within mint state, every additional grade can become increasingly difficult to achieve because graders evaluate contact marks, luster, strike, eye appeal, and surface quality with microscopic attention. An MS63 coin may look outstanding to a casual observer, while an MS67 or MS68 coin can require an entirely different level of preservation. Full bands is particularly important because the Mercury dime's reverse was often not struck with enough pressure to separate the bands completely. Collectors therefore look for clean, uninterrupted horizontal lines across the central bands. Color and toning matter too, but they need to be interpreted carefully. Original silver can develop shades ranging from brilliant white to pale gold, gray, blue, or multicolored toning, depending on its storage history. Attractive natural toning may increase eye appeal, while harsh cleaning can leave hairlines, unnatural brightness, or altered surfaces that reduce desirability. A coin advertised as uncirculated is not necessarily mint state in the professional sense, and a coin described as rare by a seller is not necessarily scarce within its grade. Certification from a respected grading service can provide an independent assessment of authenticity, grade, and recognized variety, which becomes especially valuable when the potential price difference between two apparently similar coins is hundreds or thousands of dollars. Authentication deserves equal attention because older silver coins are frequently encountered in altered or misrepresented forms. The first step is to examine the date and mint mark carefully under good lighting, followed by weight, diameter, edge, and overall design. A genuine 1937 Mercury dime should be consistent with the established 2.5-gram weight and 17.9 millimeter diameter, allowing for reasonable wear and measurement tolerances. The reeded edge should also appear natural rather than suspiciously altered. Professional authentication goes much further, using specialized equipment and comparison with known genuine dies and surfaces when necessary. Collectors should be cautious with coins that appear unusually bright, have suspiciously smooth surfaces, show evidence of polishing, or are offered at prices that seem disconnected from their condition. Cleaning a silver coin does not make it more valuable. In many cases, it damages the original surface that collectors want to preserve. The safest storage method is a chemically stable, non-PVC holder or certified slab, kept away from excessive humidity, heat, and contaminants. Avoid rubbing the coin, wiping it with a cloth, dipping it in household chemicals, or attempting to improve its appearance yourself. Even a seemingly harmless cleaning can turn an attractive collectible into a problem coin. For a coin that might reasonably fall into the $1,200 to $3,000 range because of its grade or variety, professional evaluation is far more sensible than risking permanent surface damage in an attempt to make it look newer. What makes the 1937 Mercury dime enduringly interesting is the way several different forms of rarity can exist inside one date. The ordinary circulated coin tells the story of American commerce, silver currency, and everyday life during the late Depression era. The high-grade coin tells a different story about preservation, because every mark avoided over nearly 90 years becomes part of its rarity. The full band specimen tells the story of striking quality, while a recognized double die variety introduces the specialized world of die attribution. And the auction record demonstrates the final ingredient, competition among collectors for coins that combine multiple desirable characteristics. One authenticated 1937 example may be worth only a modest premium over its silver content. Another might be a collector piece around several $100s, while a superior certified specimen can move into the $1,000 to $4,000 range or beyond when grade, mint, strike, and demand justify it. Exceptional auction records can climb far higher, as the documented 1937 D Full Bands and 1937 SMS-68 results prove, but those results belong to extraordinary coins rather than the average example. The real value of a 1937 Mercury dime, therefore, is hidden not simply in the date stamped beneath Liberty's portrait, but in the evidence surrounding that date: where it was struck, how well it was made, how carefully it survived, whether the surfaces remain original, whether the bands are fully defined, whether a recognized variety is present, and whether independent experts have confirmed what the coin actually is. For collectors, that combination is what turns a small piece of 1937 silver currency into a serious numismatic object. And it is also why two coins that look nearly identical at first glance can ultimately belong to very different levels of the market. Next coin. The 1930 Mercury dime is one of those coins that can pass through a collector's hands looking almost deceptively ordinary, yet its place in American numismatics becomes much more interesting when its condition and strike are examined closely. More than 6 million was struck at Philadelphia, but the number originally produced tells only part of the story, because decades of circulation, storage, cleaning, and ordinary handling transformed the surviving population into a wide spectrum of quality. A worn example can be an accessible piece of 1930s American history, while a sharply struck, beautifully preserved specimen can attract serious competition from specialists assembling high-grade Mercury dime sets. The most important question is therefore not simply whether the date is 1930, but what happened to that particular coin after it left the Philadelphia Mint. As we move through its history, we'll examine the economic circumstances surrounding its creation, the details that separate ordinary survivors from scarce condition rarities, the grading characteristics specialists study under magnification, and finally what authenticated examples have actually brought at auction. That journey reveals why this small silver dime can occupy very different places in the collecting market, depending on originality, preservation, strike quality, certification, and demand. The 1930 issue arrived during one of the most consequential economic periods in American history. The stock market crash of 1929 had already shaken the nation, and by 1930, the effects of the Great Depression were becoming increasingly visible through declining industrial activity, falling prices, business failures, and rising unemployment. The United States Mint responded to actual monetary demand rather than simply producing enormous quantities of every denomination, and the 1930 Mercury dime became a direct reflection of that reduced demand. Only 6,770,000 was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, an unusually modest production figure for a Philadelphia dime when compared with many surrounding years. Because Philadelphia coins traditionally carry no mint mark, the absence of a letter beneath the wreath on the reverse is exactly what should be expected from an authentic 1930 issue. There was no 1930D or 1930S Mercury dime. The entire regular production for the date came from Philadelphia. That fact is important when examining online listings or inherited collections, because a supposed 1930 Mercury dime carrying a D or S mint mark deserves immediate scrutiny. The relatively low mintage also helps explain why the date has attracted collector attention, but it does not automatically make every surviving example rare. The important distinction is between mintage rarity and condition rarity, and the 1930 issue becomes considerably more fascinating when the condition of the surviving coins is taken into account. NGC describes the 1930 Philadelphia dime as having a relatively low mintage and notes that examples can be found through the lower mint state grades, with some well-struck pieces displaying full bands. Every authentic 1930 Mercury dime is built around Adolf A. Weinmann's distinctive design, introduced in 1916 during a major renaissance in American coinage. The obverse presents Liberty in left-facing profile wearing a winged cap, an image that gave the coin its enduring nickname even though the figure was intended to be Liberty rather than the Roman god Mercury. The wings symbolize freedom of thought, an interpretation specifically recognized by the United States Mint. Around the portrait are Liberty, In God We Trust, and the date, with Weinmann's artistic approach giving the small surface remarkable depth and character. Turn the coin over, and the symbolism changes from individual liberty to national strength and peace. The reverse carries a Roman fasces surrounded by an olive branch. The bundled rods represent strength through unity, while the axe and olive branch communicate the combination of military readiness and a desire for peace. The fasces is particularly significant because it connects the design to classical Roman imagery that was widely used in Western political symbolism long before the 20th century. The physical specifications are equally important to authentication. The coin contains 90% silver and 10% copper, weighs 2.5 grams, measures about 17.9 millimeters in diameter, and has a reeded edge. That silver-copper alloy was standard for US dimes of the period and gives a genuine example, a distinctive combination of weight, metallic appearance, and ring characteristics, although collectors should never rely on sound or magnetism alone to authenticate an old coin. The United States Mint itself identifies Weinmann as the designer and confirms the winged cap, fasces, and olive branch symbolism associated with the Mercury dime. Once the 1930 dime entered circulation, its original state began disappearing almost immediately. A coin used repeatedly in commerce is exposed to pockets, cash drawers, counters, other coins, and countless surfaces, and even small contacts eventually leave marks across the fields and devices. That is why a surviving mint state specimen is fundamentally different from a circulated coin. It escaped the normal cycle of wear that affected most pieces. Grading services evaluate these differences using a numerical scale, with mint state grades beginning at MS60 for coins showing no evidence of circulation, followed by increasingly demanding levels in which contact marks, luster, strike, and overall eye appeal become critical. At the upper end, a coin can become scarce not because the mint made very few of them, but because very few survived with the combination of clean surfaces and strong original detail required for the finest grades. PCGS estimates approximately 8,000 surviving 1930 Philadelphia Mercury dimes across all grades, with roughly 600 estimated at MS60 or better, and about 250 at MS65 or better. These are estimates rather than a literal census of every surviving coin, but they illustrate the enormous difference between the original 6.77 million pieces and the much smaller population of premium survivors. PCGS records an auction result of $1,740 for a 1930 Philadelphia Mercury dime graded MS67+, demonstrating that a superb regular strike example can move well beyond the ordinary level of the date. Meanwhile, NGC's July 2026 guide lists circulated examples across a broad range and indicates that pristine uncirculated pieces can reach roughly $1,525, reinforcing the point that grade creates much of the coin's commercial separation. These figures are guides and documented sales, not guarantees for any particular coin. But there is another feature that can dramatically change the conversation: the reverse strike. On the fasces are several horizontal bands, and specialists pay especially close attention to the central crossbands. When the separation is complete and uninterrupted on a qualifying mint state coin, the piece can receive the full bands designation, commonly abbreviated FB. This is not simply a cosmetic label. The Mercury dime's design could be difficult to strike completely, meaning that two coins produced in the same year can display noticeably different levels of detail. A coin with weakly defined central bands may still be attractive and valuable, while a sharply struck example with fully separated bands can command a substantial premium because collectors competing for the finest coins want both preservation and strike quality. PCGS lists the 1930 FB issue separately and records a remarkable auction result of $14,688 for an MS67 plus FB specimen sold by Legend Rare Coin Auctions on February 25, 2021. That number is important precisely because it should not be misunderstood. It does not mean an ordinary 1930 Mercury dime is worth anywhere near that amount. It represents a highly certified, exceptionally preserved coin with a premium full bands designation at an elite grade level. PCGS also estimates roughly 500 surviving 1930 FB examples at MS65 or better, again showing that the population becomes much more specialized when strike quality is added to the grading equation. For a collector examining a raw coin, the bands should be studied under magnification and strong, diffused lighting rather than judged from a quick glance. A tiny interruption, contact mark, weakness, or planchet imperfection in the critical area can make the difference between a normal mint state coin and one eligible for the coveted designation. Surface quality creates another layer of separation, and this is where the difference between old and original becomes crucial. Silver naturally reacts with its environment, so a 1930 dime can develop gray, golden, champagne blue, or multicolored tunning depending on how it was stored for decades. Attractive natural tunning may enhance eye appeal, while harsh cleaning can leave hairlines, unnatural brightness, or altered surfaces that knowledgeable collectors immediately recognize. Luster matters as well. Original mint state luster should move across the surface under changing light, while a polished or aggressively cleaned coin often has a different, flatter appearance. Strike quality must also be considered independently from surface preservation. A coin can have beautiful luster but lack strong definition in certain areas, while another can be sharply struck but carry distracting contact marks. This is why professional grading is more complicated than simply counting scratches. At MS63 or MS64, minor marks can be acceptable, but as the grade approaches MS66 and MS67, tiny imperfections become increasingly important because the supply of truly exceptional survivors contracts sharply. PCGS currently lists a 1930 regular strike population that reaches the MS67 level, but shows no regular strike MS68 or higher in the cited record, illustrating how demanding the upper end of the scale becomes. Collectors should also understand that color classifications are not normally separate official grade categories for a Mercury dime in the way that FB is a recognized designation. Color and tunning are primarily components of originality and eye appeal. A spectacularly toned coin may bring a premium when collectors find the appearance attractive, but an unusual color should never be treated as proof of rarity by itself. Varieties and errors require an even more careful approach, because this is where online claims can become misleading. The major catalog distinction for the regular 1930 Philadelphia issue is between the standard strike and the full bands variety designation used by grading services, rather than a famous 1930 overdate or a universally recognized dramatic mint error. That does not mean an individual 1930 dime could never exhibit a genuine production anomaly. Coins can leave the mint with planchet problems, striking abnormalities, direlated characteristics, or other errors. But a genuine mint error must be established from the physical evidence, not from a vague shape, doubled-looking letter, damaged rim, or unusual mark created after the coin entered circulation. Mechanical doubling, scratches, gouges, corrosion, and post-mint damage are frequently mistaken for valuable errors. Authentication should begin with the fundamentals: correct date placement, expected Philadelphia no-mint mark status, appropriate dimensions and weight, proper reeded edge, and the distinctive details of Weinmann's dies. A suspect coin with an unusually high claimed value should then be compared with reliable references or submitted to a recognized grading and authentication service. This is especially important for a silver coin that might attract counterfeiters because its age and precious metal composition make it commercially interesting. Professional certification does not guarantee a particular market price, but it can establish authenticity and provide an independent grade, while population reports give collectors useful evidence about how many examples have been certified at different levels. The best strategy is therefore evidence first, Valuation second. Determine exactly what the coin is before deciding what it might be worth. Preservation becomes especially important when the coin already shows the characteristics that collectors prize. A potentially valuable 1930 Mercury dime should never be scrubbed, polished, dipped in household chemicals, or wiped with a cloth in an attempt to make the silver brighter. Those actions can permanently alter the surface and may result in a details grade rather than a straight numerical grade. Instead, the coin should be handled by its edges, kept in a stable, inert holder, and protected from PVC-containing plastics, excessive humidity, temperature extremes, and unnecessary handling. For a collector, the long-term goal is not to make the coin look new. It is to preserve the evidence of how the coin survived. That evidence includes original luster, natural tunning, sharp design details, clean fields, and the integrity of the reverse bands. The 1930 issue remains compelling because its scarcity exists on several levels at once. The original mintage was only 6,770,000. The estimated surviving population is far smaller, and the finest certified pieces represent an even narrower segment. A strong but non-FB mint state coin might fall into a market range around the low thousands when authentication and grade support it, while a highly desirable example with superior preservation could move toward $2,000, $3,000, or more depending on the exact grade and buyer competition. Those are not promises or fixed prices. They are the kind of market differences collectors must evaluate against current guides, certification records, and actual sales. And when the coin possesses the combination of elite grade and full bands, the documented $14,688 auction result demonstrates that the ceiling can move dramatically beyond normal expectations. Ultimately, the 1930 Mercury dime is valuable as much for what it teaches as for what it may bring. It is a physical survivor from the opening years of the Great Depression, struck from 90% silver at Philadelphia at a time when American commerce was undergoing a profound contraction. It carries Adolf A. Weinman's vision of liberty and the powerful contrast of the fasces and olive branch, combining freedom of thought, strength through unity, military preparedness, and the desire for peace in a coin small enough to disappear into a pocket. Yet nearly a century later, collectors are no longer judging these pieces simply as 10-cent coins. They are studying them as populations, comparing one certified specimen against another, examining luster under controlled lighting, scrutinizing the central bands, evaluating tunning, searching for original surfaces, and watching auction results to understand what the market is rewarding. The documented $1,740 result for an MS-67 plus regular strike coin shows the potential of an exceptional but non-FB example, while the $14,688 MS-67 plus FB sale demonstrates how dramatically a premium designation can alter the equation. Neither result should be applied indiscriminately to every 1930 dime, because value remains dependent on authenticity, exact grade, strike, full band status, surface quality, eye appeal, originality, and the willingness of collectors to compete for that particular specimen. That is the enduring lesson of the 1930 Mercury dime. Rarity is rarely contained in the date alone. It is hidden in the survival story of the individual coin, and sometimes the smallest details, the sharpness of a band, the freshness of the luster, the absence of a cleaning, or the difference between MS-66 and MS-67, are precisely what transform an old piece of silver into a serious piece of American numismatic history. Next up, the 1939 Mercury dime can look almost too familiar to attract serious investigation. A small silver coin, a winged portrait of liberty, and a date that seems to belong to a year already crowded with important events in American history. Yet when you examine one the way a specialist does, the coin begins revealing details that are invisible at a casual glance. The date is only the starting point. The mint mark, the sharpness of the strike, the condition of the silver surfaces, the quality of the luster, the separation of the reverse bands, and even subtle characteristics around the lettering can determine whether the piece is simply a collectible old dime or something much more desirable. The 1939 issue is especially interesting because it exists in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco versions, and it also has documented die varieties that can completely change the way a specialist approaches the coin. Later in this investigation, we'll examine authenticated examples that have brought impressive results, and more importantly, why those coins commanded them. The goal is not to attach a dramatic number to every 1939 dime, but to understand the evidence that separates an ordinary survivor from an exceptional numismatic specimen. To understand why the 1939 Mercury dime deserves that examination, put the coin back into the world in which it was made. America was approaching the end of the 1930s, and the country was still dealing with the long consequences of the Great Depression, while industrial production was beginning to accelerate as international tensions intensified. In Europe, Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, marking the beginning of World War II in Europe, while the United States remained officially outside the conflict. At home, economic conditions had improved from the darkest years of the Depression, although unemployment and uneven recovery were still important realities. Against that backdrop, the Mint produced 3 regular 1939 Mercury dime issues. Philadelphia struck 67,740,000 pieces, Denver produced 24,394,000, and San Francisco struck 10,540,000. That means the Mint mark becomes the first major checkpoint when examining the coin. A Philadelphia 1939 dime has no Mint mark, a Denver example carries a small d, and a San Francisco example carries an S. Those figures also show why the 3 coins should not automatically be treated as identical. San Francisco produced far fewer pieces than Philadelphia, while Denver occupied the middle ground, and the populations that survive today can differ dramatically once high-grade condition is considered. A collector who simply sees 1939 has identified the date, but a specialist immediately asks a second question: which mint made it? That tiny letter, or its intentional absence, can be the beginning of the entire valuation investigation. Now turn the coin over and study the physical object itself. The 1939 Mercury dime is struck in the traditional U.S. dime alloy of 90% silver and 10% copper, weighs 2.5 grams, measures 17.9 millimeters in diameter, and has a reeded edge. Those specifications are more than trivia because they provide useful checkpoints when authenticity is questioned. On the obverse is Adolf A. Weinmann's famous portrait of Liberty facing left, wearing the winged Phrygian cap that inspired the popular Mercury dime nickname. The wings were intended to represent freedom of thought, not the Roman deity Mercury. Around Liberty are the inscriptions Liberty and In God We Trust, with the date positioned below. The reverse presents an entirely different visual language. A fasces, representing strength through unity, stands beside an olive branch associated with peace. The design is remarkably compact, yet Weinmann managed to create strong areas of relief and texture that respond dramatically to wear. When you examine a circulated 1939 dime, notice how the highest portions of Liberty's hair and the winged cap gradually lose definition. On the reverse, the central bands around the fasces become especially important because weak striking can make them appear partially merged even on an otherwise attractive coin. The manufacturing process involved preparing silver alloy planchets, striking them between dies under substantial pressure, and producing thousands of coins from the working dies used at each facility. Every strike was never perfectly identical, and that is one reason collectors can spend years learning the small differences between ordinary examples and exceptional ones. The coin may have been created as everyday money, but the manufacturing process unintentionally created a second life for it as an object of study. The next step in the investigation is to imagine the 1939 dime leaving the mint and entering circulation. It was never produced as a collector souvenir. It was a 10-cent piece intended to move through American commerce, and over the following decades, it could have passed through countless hands, cash registers, pockets, banks, vending machines, and drawers. That circulation history explains why truly pristine survivors are far more interesting than the original mintage numbers alone suggest. A circulated coin develops friction on the highest points, and the original mint luster gradually disappears. Small contact marks accumulate across the open fields, while scratches, dents, discoloration, or cleaning can further reduce desirability. When specialists examine a potential high-grade specimen, they are effectively asking whether the coin escaped the normal history of a circulating dime. Professional grading uses the familiar 1 to 70 Sheldon scale, and once a Mercury dime reaches mint state, the distinction between grades can become extremely demanding. MS-60 can describe an uncirculated coin with significant marks or distractions, while MS-65, MS-66, MS-67, and above represent increasingly difficult levels of preservation and eye appeal. On a 1939 Philadelphia issue, PCGS estimates thousands of survivors overall, but the number of coins capable of competing at the highest levels becomes much smaller. That is the concept of condition rarity. Millions may have been struck, yet very few may survive with the combination of clean surfaces, strong luster, sharp strike, attractive appearance, and high certification grade that advanced collectors seek. A coin does not become rare merely because it is old. It becomes scarce at a particular quality level because so many other examples were spent, worn, cleaned, damaged, or simply failed to survive in exceptional condition. There is another detail that can completely change the investigation, and it is located on the reverse. Look closely at the bands wrapped around the fasces. Mercury dime specialists pay extraordinary attention to the central horizontal bands because a sharply separated set of bands can qualify a coin for the full bands designation, commonly abbreviated FB. This designation is associated with strike quality rather than simply age or brightness. A coin can be beautifully preserved but weakly struck, while another can have excellent separation but enough contact marks to receive a lower overall grade. The most desirable pieces combine both qualities, a high numerical grade and strong, uninterrupted central band separation. That is why two 1939 dimes that appear nearly identical in a casual photograph can occupy completely different positions in the collecting market. The distinction becomes especially important with the 1939D PCGS records a 1939D full bands specimen graded MS-69 FB that sold for $42,300 at Legend Rare Coin Auctions in September 2019. That is an extraordinary auction result, but it belongs to an authenticated, elite-grade coin and absolutely should not be interpreted as the normal value of a 1939D Mercury dime. The Philadelphia issue also has a documented regular strike auction record of $6,600 for an MS-69 specimen sold by Heritage Auctions in 2021, while the 1939 S Full Bands issue has a recorded $10,350 result for an MS-68 specimen. These numbers demonstrate something much more important than the headline prices themselves. The market can reward exceptional preservation and strike quality enormously, but only when the coin actually possesses those characteristics and professional certification confirms them. Once the major physical characteristics are understood, the investigation becomes more specialized. The 1939 Philadelphia issue has a recognized double die obverse variety, FS101, and the 1939D has a documented D/D repunched mint mark variety, FS501. These are exactly the kinds of features that make experienced collectors slow down instead of immediately assigning a value. On a suspected double die, the collector looks for genuine secondary design impressions in the appropriate areas rather than random damage or machine doubling. On the Denver repunched mint mark, the examination centers on the D itself and its underlying characteristics. Magnification, controlled lighting, reliable variety references, and comparison with authenticated examples are essential because modern marketplace listings often contain misidentified doubling or post-mint damage. A documented example shows why the distinction matters. PCGS records a 1939 DD FS5 one full band specimen graded MS65FB that sold for $2,795. That is a legitimate example of a 1939 variety entering the low thousands range. But even that result should not be generalized to every 1939D. The specific coin had an attributed variety, professional certification, a high mint state grade, and full bands. Meanwhile, PCGS records a 1939 FS1, one double die obverse full bands example graded MS66 that sold for $792 in 2014, illustrating another important lesson. A recognized variety does not automatically produce a four-figure result. Market value depends on the precise variety, grade, strike, eye appeal, certification, and the competition present when the coin is offered. At this stage, imagine the coin under bright but diffuse lamp and begin examining it the way a professional would. Start with the date and mint mark, then move across the lettering, Liberty's hair and wing details, the open fields, and finally the reverse bands. Look for original mint luster rather than artificial brightness. Natural silver tunning can range from light gray and champagne to deeper gray or attractive multicolored patterns, and color by itself does not establish rarity. What matters is whether the tunning appears natural, whether the underlying surfaces remain original, and whether the appearance improves or detracts from the coin's eye appeal. Be particularly cautious with unusually brilliant silver, because old coins are sometimes clean to make them appear newer. Hairlines from wiping or polishing can destroy the original surface and may cause a grading service to assign a details designation rather than a straight mint state grade. Authentication should also include weight, diameter, edge examination, and close inspection of the dies and overall design. A genuine 1939 dime should fit the established specifications, but weight alone cannot prove authenticity because counterfeiters can manipulate weight or use appropriate silver alloys. Suspected errors require the same discipline. There are documented varieties for the 1939 issues, but a damaged rim, flattened lettering, random doubling, scratch, gouge, or plating-like discoloration should not automatically be called a mint error. If a coin appears unusually valuable, professional authentication is the safest route. A certified holder does not guarantee a future sale price, but it provides independent confirmation of authenticity and grade, while population data and auction records help place that coin within the broader market. The final part of the investigation is preservation, because once a potentially important 1939 Mercury dime has survived for nearly 9 decades, the greatest danger may no longer be circulation. It may be the collector trying to improve it. Do not polish the silver, scrub the surfaces, wipe it with a cloth, or use household chemicals. Avoid PVC-containing holders and store the coin in an inert, archival quality holder or a professional grading holder, away from excessive humidity, heat, and contaminants. Handle raw examples by the edges whenever possible, and if the coin appears to have unusual tunning, an exceptional strike, a possible FS101 double die, or the 1939 DD FS501 variety, resist the temptation to clean or alter it before examination. The long-term appeal of the 1939 Mercury dime comes from the combination of history and scarcity. A 1939P with a huge original mintage can still become conditionally rare at the highest grades. A low mintage 1939S can attract attention from collectors building complete mint sets. A 1939D can become particularly interesting when strong strike, full bands, and exceptional preservation come together. And a documented variety can create an entirely different collecting category. Some certified high-grade or variety examples can legitimately move into the $1,000 to $4,000 range when the exact combination of grade, originality, strike, certification, and buyer demand supports it, while ordinary circulated pieces remain far below that level. The extraordinary auction records, such as the $42,300 $1,939 DMS69FB, belong to exceptional authenticated specimens, not to every coin bearing the same date. In the end, the 1939 Mercury dime is not a coin whose story can be solved by simply searching for a date and reading a price beside it. Its story is found in the details. The tiny mint mark, the untouched luster, the texture of the silver, the sharpness of Liberty's portrait, the separation of the reverse bands, the possibility of a recognized die variety, and the certification that confirms what the eye is seeing. That is why collectors continue to investigate these little silver coins decades after they disappeared from ordinary circulation. The real rarity is not merely owning a 1939 dime, but finding one whose survival, strike, originality, and documented characteristics make it genuinely exceptional. Last coin. The 1941 Mercury dime is the kind of coin that can sit unnoticed in a collection for years until someone turns it under the light and begins asking the right questions. Millions were struck, millions circulated, and the design was already familiar to Americans by the time this particular issue entered commerce. Yet certain authenticated survivors have become remarkably desirable among specialists. The mystery is not simply hidden in the date, because 1941 was a high-production year for the series. It is hidden in the combination of mint, preservation, strike quality, surface originality, reverse band definition, and in some cases, die varieties that can transform an otherwise ordinary-looking dime into a much more specialized piece. A collector examining one of these coins is not merely asking, "Is this old?" The real investigation is much more precise. Where was it made? How well was it struck? Did it survive without circulation damage? Does the silver still display its original luster? Are the reverse bands fully defined? Is there a recognized variety? And has an independent grading service confirmed those characteristics? Later, we'll examine verified market results and see why some 1941 Mercury dimes have attracted serious competition, while ordinary circulated examples remain comparatively accessible. The fascinating part is that the difference can sometimes be measured in details so small that a casual observer would never notice them. The first clue appears when we place the 1941 dime into its historical setting. America was no longer living in the uncertain atmosphere of the early Depression years. Industrial production was expanding, employment was improving, and the country was moving rapidly toward a wartime economy, although the United States would not formally enter World War II until December 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor in December transformed the nation's economic and military priorities, making 1941 a pivotal year in American history. Against that backdrop, the United States Mint produced enormous quantities of Mercury dimes because the denomination remained an essential part of everyday commerce. Philadelphia struck 175,090,000 regular 1941 dimes, Denver produced 45,634,000, and San Francisco struck 43,090,000. Those figures immediately tell us something important. The 1941 date itself is not a traditional low-mintage rarity. Philadelphia examples carry no mint mark, while Denver coins have a D and San Francisco coins have an S. The mint mark matters because each facility produced its own population, with its own striking characteristics and surviving high-grade population. There was also a separate Philadelphia proof issue with a mintage of 16,557, and that is an entirely different collecting category from the regular circulation strikes. So when a collector says 1941 Mercury dime, an experienced numismatist immediately wants to know whether it is a Philadelphia, Denver, San Francisco, or proof example. That distinction is the foundation of the investigation, because two coins bearing the same year can have dramatically different levels of collector interest depending on exactly how and where they were produced. Now examine the coin itself, because the physical specifications provide the next layer of evidence. The 1941 Mercury dime contains 90% silver and 10% copper, weighs 2.5 grams, measures approximately 17.9 millimeters in diameter, and has a reeded edge. That alloy was standard for U.S. silver dimes of the period, giving the coin both intrinsic silver content and the durability necessary for circulation. The design came from sculptor Adolf A. Weinman, whose winged Liberty head became one of the most recognizable images in American coinage. On the obverse, Liberty faces left wearing a winged Phrygian cap. The wings were intended to symbolize freedom of thought, although the design eventually became popularly associated with the Roman god Mercury, creating the nickname that collectors still use today. The inscriptions Liberty and In God We Trust frame the portrait, while the date identifies the individual issue. Turn the coin over, and the symbolism becomes more complex. The reverse shows a fasces, a bundle of rods traditionally associated with authority and strength through unity, accompanied by an olive branch representing peace. Weinmann's design is remarkable because the small surface contains areas of relatively high relief that respond strongly to both striking pressure and circulation. Manufacturing began with silver-copper planchets prepared to the proper dimensions, followed by striking between dies at the mint. Each facility used its own dies and production equipment, and subtle differences in strike quality naturally appeared among individual pieces. This is why a collector cannot judge a 1941 dime simply from its color or overall appearance. The coin's dimensions, edge, design details, and surface characteristics form a combined fingerprint that becomes particularly important when authentication or high-value certification is involved. Once the dime left the mint, its numismatic destiny was largely determined by ordinary American life. It was money first, collectible second. A 1941 dime could have traveled through stores, banks, streetcar fares, restaurants, cash registers, and countless pockets during the years when the country was entering the Second World War. Every transaction created another opportunity for friction, contact marks, scratches, and loss of luster. That circulation history explains why an original mint state survivor is fundamentally different from a worn example. On a circulated coin, the highest areas of Liberty's hair and winged cap gradually flatten, while the reverse details around the fasces become softer. The original cartwheel-like mint luster also diminishes as the metal is repeatedly handled. Professional grading attempts to translate those physical differences into a standardized assessment. The Sheldon 1:70 scale separates circulated grades from mint state grades, with MS-60 and higher reserved for coins showing no evidence of circulation, although coins at the lower mint state levels can still have substantial marks or unattractive surfaces. As the grade rises through MS-63, MS-64, MS-65, MS-66, and MS-67, the requirements become increasingly demanding. A coin can technically be uncirculated and still fall well short of the quality collectors seek at the upper end. Surface marks, luster, strike, eye appeal, and overall originality all matter. This is where condition rarity enters the story. A date with more than 175 million Philadelphia examples does not sound scarce, but very few coins can survive nearly a century while retaining extraordinary surfaces and exceptional strike quality. PCGS currently estimates roughly 10,000 surviving 1941 Philadelphia Mercury dimes in all grades, and about 6,000 at MS-65 or better within its full bands population estimate, illustrating how sharply the field narrows once quality becomes part of the definition of rarity. The most revealing area to inspect may be on the reverse, where the fasces is wrapped by horizontal bands. Experienced Mercury dime collectors know that the central bands can become a dividing line between an attractive mint state coin and a much more desirable full bands example. The designation, usually written FB, requires strong separation of the central horizontal bands, reflecting a combination of die state and striking quality. A coin can have dazzling luster and still fail to qualify if the bands are weakly struck. Conversely, a coin can have excellent band separation but lose value because of heavy contact marks, impaired surfaces, or a lower overall grade. The market becomes especially intense when exceptional strike quality and exceptional preservation occur together. One of the clearest examples is the 1941 Philadelphia Full Bands issue. PCGS records an auction result of $36,000 for an MS-68 plus FB specimen sold by Heritage Auctions on August 31, 2025. That figure belongs to an extraordinary certified coin at an elite grade level and should never be interpreted as the value of a typical 1941 Mercury dime. In fact, PCGS's broader auction records show how wide the spectrum can be, with ordinary 1941 mint state examples trading at much lower levels, while the finest certified full bands coins reach dramatically higher territory. This is the psychology behind condition rarity. Collectors competing for a complete high-grade set are not simply buying silver. They are competing for a coin that is difficult to replace at the same quality level. A beautiful MS-65 may be available again, while an exceptional MS-68 Plus FB can be separated from the next comparable specimen by years of searching. But the 1941 story becomes even more interesting when we move beyond simple grade and start searching for varieties. The Philadelphia issue has a recognized double-die obverse variety catalogued as FS101. This is not the same thing as the vague doubling that can appear from mechanical movement during the striking process or from post-mint damage. Genuine double-die characteristics result from the die-making process and must occur in the appropriate design areas with the correct diagnostic appearance. PCGS lists the 1941 DDO FS101 as a recognized variety and records an MS-65 auction result of $2,695. That gives us a realistic example of how a recognized variety can push a 1941 coin into the collector thousands range without implying that every Philadelphia dime is worth anything close to that amount. Denver adds another specialized dimension because the 1941D is known for double die and repunch mint mark varieties, with NGC describing the issue as rich in both categories and noting that the better examples can be quite prominent and popular with collectors. San Francisco also offers several documented varieties, including SS repunched mint marks and a large S variety. PCGS catalogs multiple 1941 S varieties, including FS501, FS502, and FS511, with full bands versions of several of them. These varieties are exactly why specialists use magnification, reference photographs, and certified examples rather than relying on an ordinary internet photograph. A suspicious mark near a letter does not automatically make a double die, and a strange-looking mint mark does not automatically create a valuable repunch. The evidence has to match the recognized diagnostics. For the collector, that means the investigation should proceed slowly. Identify the mint, confirm the date, study the design, then determine whether the suspected characteristic actually corresponds to a documented variety. There is another category that can dramatically influence the market: the difference between an attractive coin and an original coin. Silver reacts with its environment over time, so a 1941 Mercury dime can develop natural gray, golden, champagne blue, or multicolored toning. Collectors sometimes describe coins as brilliant, toned, or proof-like, but color alone does not establish rarity or authenticity. What matters is how the surface behaves under light, whether the luster remains natural, and whether the toning appears consistent with long-term storage rather than artificial treatment. A coin that has been polished may look brighter, but actually become less desirable because the original surface has been disturbed. Hairlines from wiping, unnatural shine, or evidence of chemical treatment can lead to a details designation instead of a straight numerical grade. Authentication should therefore combine several tests rather than relying on one. Check the expected 2.5 gram weight and approximately 17.9 mm diameter, inspect the reeded edge, examine the lettering and date, and compare the portrait and reverse design with known genuine examples. A magnet is not a sufficient authentication tool because silver is non-magnetic, but that fact alone does not prove a coin is genuine. Counterfeits can be manufactured from different metals or altered from genuine pieces, so unusual weight, incorrect dimensions, suspicious surfaces, soft details, casting characteristics, or an unnatural edge deserve professional attention. Genuine mint errors also require caution. There are documented 1941 varieties, but a scratch, gouge, flattened rim, machine doubling, or damage caused after circulation should not be presented as a valuable mint error without evidence. When the potential financial difference becomes significant, professional certification provides a far safer foundation than an informal online valuation. Preservation is where the collector's responsibility begins, because a 1941 Mercury dime that has survived since the wartime era does not need improvement, it needs protection. Never polish the silver, rub it with a cloth, use household chemicals, or attempt to remove natural tunning simply because the coin appears darker than expected. Those actions can permanently alter the surface and destroy the very characteristics that advanced collectors value. A raw coin should ideally be kept in an inert, archival quality holder, protected from PVC, excessive humidity, heat, and contaminants. Handle it by the edges whenever possible, and if the coin appears to have exceptional luster, unusually sharp reverse bands, a suspected FS101 double die, a repunched mint mark, or another documented variety, have it examined before making any alterations. Market demand for the 1941 Mercury dime is driven by several overlapping groups: collectors building date sets, specialists pursuing full bands examples, variety enthusiasts, registry set competitors, and buyers interested in historically significant American silver coinage. That produces a remarkably broad market. A certified collector quality example can move into the $1,000 to $4,000 range when grade, originality, variety, strike, and eye appeal justify the premium, while an exceptional coin can move well beyond that range. PCGS records a $4,200 auction result for a 1941 SMS68 FB proof-like specimen in 2024, while the same database records an extraordinary $36,000 result for the elite 1941 Philadelphia MS68 plus FB coin. Those are not contradictory numbers. They demonstrate how individual characteristics create entirely different market categories. The long-term importance of the 1941 Mercury dime therefore lies in the combination of history and survival. It is a silver witness to a pivotal year in American history, but its modern value is determined by what happened to that individual coin after it left the mint. And the next time you examine an old silver dime, remember that the smallest detail may be the one that changes the entire story.